I wish I could remember my first awkward steps. As a parent, I do remember my child's first steps. I recall her wobble as she balanced her pliant frame beneath her joyous eyes. Failure seems to have no place in a child's mind. She strived for the higher altitudes until she succeeded. I wish I could recollect this accomplishment. Perhaps I had forgotten I was once a barnacle whose sustenance was dependent upon the ocean currents. I had forgotten the tragic day when the glue I excreted gave way and I floated away from my permanent home. From this moment on, I had to forage for food and shelter to survive. Perhaps this is a source of my insatiable thirst. My desire to consume stems from an inherent insecurity, a trauma I faced as a wandering barnacle. I'm a sculptor, and sculptors study form. They study the figure. They study things in motion. Now, most sculptors end up imitating motion, whether it's sleep or a galloping horse or emotion. But it's an act of imitation. So some sculptors, they end up saying, well, I want to study motion, but they just decide to incorporate motion instead. So mobiles are a great art form in which a sculptor can incorporate motion into the work. This is Kitty's world. Kitty is sculpted after a child that I knew in grade school, and she was pigeon-toed. I always thought she appeared very vulnerable to me, so I modeled this figure after her and placed her in the center of her own world. She seems quite comfortable. Kitty's world actually uses 5 different balancing points or fulcrums. It's of course tethered by the string here, which is 1 point with this as the counterweight. Another pivot point where these stones are attached to this wire arm. And that's the counterweight for that. And then you have the umbrellas, which are then balanced on the screws. And one of the tricks, of course, was to get these umbrellas to move through this space, through that little negative space, without hitting. And it's actually, it's amazing how much weight you actually need to counter, even for these light umbrellas, to keep it all balanced. This is the tightrope walker. For this mobile, the stones here are the counterweight for which keeps the wire suspended out. It also compensates for the weight of the figure that's also on the wire. Every one of these beads count in keeping this thing balanced, and the way the figure stays balanced up there is its balance point, the fulcrum, right here, where its feet are cupped and resting on the wire. If the weight of these beads, the mass below, weighs more than what's above fulcral point, the figure will stay upright and balanced. And of course, the weight has to be distributed evenly on either side. If you've seen the documentary Man on Wire, where he walked across the trade towers, if he had a pole like this one, which is bent and curved, where where the weight was distributed the same way, it would be impossible to knock him off. But he doesn't carry a pole like that. He carries a fairly straight pole. And what he does is he carries it at waist height. And so what he's done is he's made himself 3 feet tall. He's lowered his center of gravity. And when he lays on the wire, which I would never want to do, but he's actually more stable because part of his weight is now below the balance focal point, and he's actually more stable. This is a community gallery, and we've been trying to avoid the leaky roof. In this case, I'm trying to take advantage. So this piece is called IV. Above here, you'll see a plastic tarp, and there's actually a puddle there. And so I'm actually drawing the water from this string down through the globe, and you can see it. There's a reservoir inside that collects the water, and then you can see it coming down and trailing down the string. The trick was how to keep the water at this level, because if it evaporates, then the mobile won't be working. When the water is filled up to the very top of this fishbowl, it bubbles up over the top, creates a meniscus. So when the water does that, it's called water tension. And so if there's an object light enough to float, it will push it into the center. It seems that the droplets make a little bit of turbulence in the water, and so it keeps the ball turning, slowly turning. This is the small universe. The top is the only part that moves. It's balanced on a pin. This is the large universe, the universe. There's no large universe, it's just the universe. This piece is related to the tightrope walker, in that this little Cosmo here, you can see that the beads are slightly lower than the balance point. So the weight is slightly lower there, but not by much. When the whole system becomes planar, it's much more sensitive and much more difficult to balance. Every one of these beads, its placement, it really matters in trying to keep this thing balanced. And so it's very precarious. And slowly going around, I would balance the thing out and get it the way it looks now. So that's how the universe was balanced. This is another watermobile. Buoyancy and magnetism are the two forces that are coming into play here. This blue-colored disc, light-colored blue disc, is a magnet. And there's another magnet that it's attracted to that's underneath this yellow plastic disc here. So they're attracting each other while the ball wants to float, and so they're pulling against each other. And that's what's actually keeping the whole thing suspended in the middle of this glass. There's actually a small tolerance of 1/8 of an inch on either side, and about 1/4 inch to the bottom. So this was actually extremely difficult to balance because like the tightrope walker, which is based on symmetry, there's nothing symmetrical about this. So to keep the disc level and to keep the whole thing suspended in this very confined space without touching bottom or the sides took a very long time to do. This is a steam whistle beer bottle. I took some dandelion or thistle wishes and attached them to this sort of floating, I don't know what to call it, celestial body above, and had this big rock, this beautiful rock in our garden as a counterweight. So for me it was kind of a silly kind of arrangement. It's a very delicate. Every once in a while I'll catch a wish, and I'll wonder whether I'm wishing on somebody else's wish. And I don't know if there's a rewrite on wishes, or you can accumulate wishes, many wishes on one. So I think the safest thing to do is to harvest your own wishes, grow them, cultivate your own, and then your wishes are safe. So this is the tilting shelf, and the tilting shelf has some tar sands and some evaporating water. Now it's water heavy, but the shelf actually, as it evaporates, over the course of a month, tilts and goes into the other extreme position. Now, as you can see, my artwork, the little sculptures are all staying quite nicely balanced and put without tipping over. And that was part of the challenge of this work, was how to keep my work balanced, my little world here balanced, without it tipping over while the environment is changing around me. So ideally, to keep this in perfect balance, I would have to have every object weigh the same. So this snail would ideally weigh the same as this artwork would weigh the same as that, and that. So I guess I could have done that, but I didn't. So this threaded rod here, without the water and the sand, compensates for the weight discrepancy between these. So this threaded rod I can move back and forth. I can turn it. And so without the water and the sand, I can balance the whole shelf level. And then I add the water and the sand, and I make it water heavy, and then when the water evaporates, it tilts. This is the golf course. This mobile has a counterweight of about 15 to 20 pounds of rock here, which counteracts the weight of that tiny little glass of water cantilevered way over there. As it evaporates, the arm will tilt and tilt and tilt, and then eventually the glass just lets go. So it gives the appearance that sort of things are okay until there's a disaster. Anyway, that's what this piece does. It self-destroys when things are not in balance.